This screencast is looking at ConcertCo, so another CVP question. So again, if you haven't looked at the question already, I suggest pause the screencast, go back, read fully through the requirements firstly to figure out what you're being asked, and then read right through the question as well. So I'm assuming you've done that, so we'll move on to the first part of the question, which is based on the budgeted information above, calculate the contribution per unit for the coming year. So again, the first one to start off, typically fairly straightforward in terms of calculations. Just make sure you read the question and all the information that's given. So we'll look at part A, is to do with contribution per unit. So we know contribution per unit is CPU, and that is equal to sales price minus your variable cost per unit. Okay, so you need to understand what contribution per unit means. So you're told what ticket sales is, you're told variable costs, variable staff costs, rent, which is a note, and fixed costs, giving you a profit of 1700. So you're told ticket sales of 9 million, assume ticket sales of 500,000 tickets. Well, therefore it should be straightforward enough to get your selling price is 9 million euros over 500,000 tickets, which is 18 euro per unit. So put that out to 2 decimals in case. Now we're looking for our variable costs. Well, first variable cost is staff. We'll put in staff, and you're told it's 2,500 or 2.5 million, should I say, and it's still over 500,000 tickets. Because remember, CVP analysis assumes all the variable elements move in direct proportion to one level of activity. In this case, it's tickets. So that's 5 euro per ticket sold. And other variable costs are 1 million, so it's plus 1 million over 500,000, which gets you 2. So that's the first variable staff costs and other variable costs, giving you to 7 euro per ticket. Now you have to just pay attention to note 2. The rental agreement includes a fixed cost per annum of 150 grand or per month, and a revenue provision of 10% of turnover. So we'd have talked about this in class. This is what's called a mixed cost. Okay, so if you look at the rent, it has a fixed element of plus 150,000 per month times 12, so 1.8 million. And you're told in the notes, so watch things like this. Sometimes you'll put in things like this to make sure students are actually reading the question and not just going off and regurgitating out a formula and putting in some numbers. So you're told the fixed element has been included above. Well, that's obviously incorrect. They've only included the 1800. But we also know there's a variable element, and that is 10%. So you know the variable element is 9 million times 0.1. So it's actually 90,000. So the full rent is 270,000. Or sorry to say 2.7 million. So if you didn't read the question fully, and particularly read the notes of the question, you would have missed that vital part. So now you have to go in. There's actually another variable cost here. So you have staff, you have other variable costs, but you also have the rent. And it's 10% of turnover, therefore per ticket it'll be 10% as well. So for every ticket you sell, you're going to have a 1.8 euro cost to the rental agreement. So that gets you total variable costs of 8.8 euro, and off that then you can calculate your contribution per unit, which is 18 minus 8.8. So your contribution per unit, which is the requirement in the question, is 9.20, so €9.20 for every ticket sold. So again, it's important, number one, you understand what the formula is, you understand the logic of contribution, and secondly, always read the notes and read the questions. It will not always be 100% straightforward. It wants students to pay attention to the detail that's given. Okay. So the next part then is calculate the break-even point in number of tickets and in revenue, and confirm this by preparing a calculation of profit and loss at that level of activity. So 2 parts, break-even number 1, and then confirm your break-even. So if we do the break-even first, you know the break-even point equals your fixed costs over your CPU. Okay, so go back and look at your notes and figure out and you'll see the logic for that. We know what are our fixed costs. Well, our fixed costs, somewhere were given in the question. It's rent. We know it's 1.8 million. That's the fixed element, and then you also have fixed cost of 2 million as well. So there's rent, of 1800, and you have other fixed costs of 2 million. Just format those. So based on that then, total fixed costs is 3.8 million. We already know our CPU, which is your contribution per unit, is 920 from part A. So again, if you're in the exam, you wouldn't even have to pull in that CPU again, just say using CPU from part A, just to save yourself time. There's no point trying to copy down every so often the workings you've already done. And finally then, break even in units is 3.8 million over 9.20, meaning we have to sell 413,043 tickets to break even. And the break even in revenue is essentially your units times your sales price, which is 18 in this case. So you need to make sales revenue of about 7.5 million or sell 413,000 tickets. And don't forget, again, always read the requirement. You're being asked to confirm this by preparing a calculation in the profit and loss of that level of activity. So this essentially means you just try and do a P&L like it's done up here. So you show your total revenue, variable costs, that gets you to contribution, and you have your fixed costs, and then your profits. That's all it's asking for. It just wants you to understand what does it mean to show the profit and loss for the period. Well, my revenue I know is 7.43 million. My variable costs, well, I know each ticket costs me €8.80 that I sell, and at the break-even point I need to sell 413,000 tickets, so you multiply them by each other. And finally then you get the contribution by taking your total revenue from your total sales. So your contribution here is 3.8 million, and your fixed costs are also 3.8 million, which gives us a profit or no loss. So no profit or no loss, which is essentially your break even. And remember the question we would have done when we looked at Alcom, what does the total contribution have to be at the break even point? And you see the total contribution at the break even point will be the exact same as your fixed cost. Okay. The next part then, again, you won't be asked this in an exam, but it's important to understand how to use Excel, the functionality, particularly for visualization and graphing, and also then just to understand from a visual perspective what a cost volume profit graph is. So the next one is part C. So the first thing, now remember, go back to your slides. So in the slides, the first thing you do is what's the relevant range. So it's always going to be from 0 to somewhere. We know in this question that you've produced or sold 500,000 tickets, so you might go out to 700,000 or 800,000, just to give you a bit of show the visualization after the break, after your current level of activity as well. Then prepare the calculations for total revenue and total costs, and then you plot them. So if we go back to our Excel, we're going to start at levels of activity of 0, and we'll go up in 50,000 intervals. So we start with 0, 50, and we go all the way out. Well, that's going to be too far. So we go about to 700,000. Okay. So you can do that in Excel and just click and drag it. So we're going up in 50s to 700,000. We'll do here total rev. We'll do here fixed costs, variable costs, and then total costs. So that's what you need to do for each one. You know, at any level of activity, the fixed cost is going to stay the same. It's always going to be 3.8 million. So you can absolute reference that for anyone who follows in Excel, and you can just drag it across. Alternatively, you can just put 3.8 million in each cell. It just shows you how to do it. The next one is, we skip total revenue here. So at total revenue, it's essentially for every unit you sell, you're going to get €18 in revenue. So at 0, well, you're going to get no revenue. At 50,000, you're going to have 900,000 or 90,000, I should say 900,000 of sales, and then you just go over for each and every one of the levels of activity you're looking at. Okay, so that gets you your total revenue. Variable cost is a similar concept. So you say for every variable or every unit you produce or every ticket you sell, it's going to cost you €8.80 in variable costs. So same principle again, you can drag that across using your absolute reference in Excel, and it just shows you how to actually prepare. Now I said that you're not going to need to know this in the exam, but it'll be useful just to understand that there is this possibility in Excel should you wish to visualize things and our levels of activity. Finally then you figure out what your total costs are. Your total costs are just your fixed cost plus your variable. Okay, so once you have those done, then what you're going to do is you're going to insert your graph. So the way I do it is I highlight the level of activity, which is your x-axis, and highlight 1, the total revenue, because you don't want to graph the fixed and variable, you only want to graph the final one, the total cost. So I go to here, insert, chart, a line chart is what we want, 2D line, and you can see here that is total revenue graphed, and you can format this axis if you want, just to make it look a bit nicer. So it just shows you different levels of activity. So again, it's just small here, so you won't see it's granular. But as well as that, then it shows you here, if you click on it, that's the data set we have. We also want to include total cost. So you just select data, and now what we want to do is we want to add a data series. So we want to add another data series. We want to call it total cost, and the values we're going to put in, well, are all the values in our total cost. So now we've total cost in and we've total revenue, and we click OK. So now you come back here and you can see that this is essentially your CVP graph. So again, very similar to the one you will see here. It's only this one is obviously formatted a bit more. But what the point you want to see is you have your total revenue at 0 level of activity, there's no revenue, and you gradually move up along as you produce more units. Likewise, the total cost at 0 level, now this is just, I'll format this axis to show you. So see, at 0 level of activity, you're always going to have some cost, and that's essentially 3.8 million, just under the 4 million now. And one of the most important points here is, here's your break-even point. Your break-even point here is ballpark around your 450 mark. Now we go after our calculation was, well, it's around 413, so we know graphically you're not going to get it exact, but you can make it out here. So that's essentially how you graph it. You take your steps, as we said here, get a range of output, prepare your calculations, and then you finally graph it. All you need to worry about is what a CVP curve is, and if you were given one, that you'll be able to identify what the main points are in terms of, here's your break-even point, all below this, where costs are bigger than revenue, that's losses, and all above it here is where you're making profits. So we go back to your questions then. That tells you about prepare the CVP graph. And the other thing that's actually told is identify the margin of safety. So the margin of safety, everyone should know from looking at the slides, is the margin of safety is how many units can sales fall by, either in absolute terms or percentage terms, before you break even. So your current volume is 500,000 tickets. Your break-even volume is 413,043, 413,043. Therefore, your margin of safety in units is 86. So about 87,000, or your margin of safety in percentage terms, it is 86 or 87 over 500. So that means, and it's important to understand what it means in English, that means the sales can fall by 17% before you break even. And to show that on a graph I've one done earlier, you look at here, this is your break even point. If we've seen, it's just over 400,000. Same graph, this is tidied up from before, it's the one we put up. And your 500,000 is where you are, so that's your margin of safety. that buffer. Okay, so the next part of this question then looks at the lease proposal. So you're looking at the landlord and you're saying, consider whether Tom's proposed new terms of the lease make financial sense based on current and budget levels of activity. So we'll go back now, we're doing part D, and we're doing part 1. Alright, so you go up and you look at the question again, and you see the current lease is up for renewal, and the CEO, Tom Hughes, considering going into negotiations. So instead of having the rental turnover provision, he suggests he just wants a flat fee per month at a 60% premium that's currently offered. So we know currently, the current setup is a fixed element of 1.8 million, and there's a variable element of 10% of turnover, which we know comes to 900,000. So we know currently at the current budget levels of activity, rent is costing us 2.7 million. The proposed one is essentially based on, we're paying 150,000 per month. So you go back up here, you can see 150,000 per month. Question per month times 12, and you're told it's times 1.6 because you're paying a 60% premium. So actually, at the current levels of activity, it doesn't make financial sense. It's costing you 180,000 extra at this new proposal. But the good students among us, and if this come up in an exam, there may be a non-financial perspective that, well, actually, if you are planning to expand your business and you're going to have a big jump in volume, it would make sense to go for this fixed proposal if the landlord went for it, because then your variable cost, as we'll look at in a second, falls considerably. So while based on the current levels of activity, it doesn't make financial sense, there is a more strategic angle that students should be aware of, that, look, if we can cap our rent, and if we expect volumes to rise, that could be beneficial to us because we don't have to give that 10% away each time to the landlord. Second part of that is determine the required level of activity for the proposal to make the same level of profits as currently budgeted if ConcertCo does change the lease. So there's a bit involved here, and there's some of these type of questions you'll see here, and you'll see in another revision question that I give is saying, what is the level of activity for both of them to make the same profits? So for staying with the current rent as we had it, with a fixed and variable portion, or changing to the new lease structure. What you're essentially comparing there is the two cost structures and determining at what level of activity would you be indifferent. So what's the new variable cost is the first thing we're going to look at. Well, our old variable cost we'll take first. Our old variable cost was 880. However, the new variable cost then, we no longer have 10% revenue if we change to a completely fixed. Therefore, we can remove the 880 minus the 10% portion, which is 1.8. So remember, for every extra ticket we sell under the old thing, we had to give 10% of that to the landlord. Under the new one, that will be gone. So the new variable cost is 7. And therefore, don't forget, it's not the variable cost you're really worried about, it's the contribution per unit. The new CPU is €18 per ticket sold minus 7 as variable costs. It means the new contribution per unit is 11. Okay? So that's the first portion, is to figure out, well, what's the new contribution per unit? And likewise then we want to say, well, what's our target profit? Because essentially what we're trying to say is, well, based on this new cost structure of €11 of a CPU and new fixed costs, well, our new fixed costs are going to be our old fixed costs, which were our old other fixed costs, which were 2 million. So ignoring the rent for a second, plus our new rental cost, which is all fixed now, of 2.88. So our new fixed cost is 4.88 million. And the question asked us, based on this new structure, i.e. the new lease, what's the required level of activity to make the same profit? So our target profit is what the profit that we made in our existing. So it's your 1.7 million. Now, I would accept 1.7 million if you gave it to me in the exam, but the actual answer is 1.7 million minus the 900,000 that it was left out. So remember from note 2 above that only the fixed element had been included there, therefore there's another 900,000 that had to come out. I would have accepted either based on that answer. So your target profit is 800,000. So units required will be, remember this is your sum of what's your fixed costs plus your target profit over your contribution per unit. So you can go back, and if you don't understand that, you're essentially saying, well look, I need to cover my fixed cost of 4.8 million. I need to make an extra profit of 800,000, and for every unit or ticket I sell, I'm making 11 euro. Therefore, to be indifferent between the new lease structure and the old lease structure, I need to sell 516,000 tickets. So the point is here, I need to sell a bit more than I currently need, because obviously I have a bit more cost involved with the current level of activity. But the more important thing is, and this comes back to your cost structure, this contribution per unit of 11 is more beneficial than the contribution per unit of 920. So getting back to your operating leverage, the bigger scale you go over and above your 500,000 units, this new lease structure is more worthwhile, because it gives you bigger benefit for bigger profits. Right? Just bear in mind that when you're looking at understanding the cost structures that are involved. Because you limit the involvement of the landlord in their turnover, you limit their profitability, and ultimately the profits then come to you, ConcertCo. So that is a landlord, again a practical scenario, and the last one then is to do with a ticketing proposal. So the ticketing proposal, we're looking at part E, and looking at part 1. So consider where Tom's proposed calculate the break-even level for the new ticketing proposal. So new proposal is, instead of doing it in-house, the ticketing, you're going to do it with ConcertTickets.ie. We provide a comprehensive package. So an admin fee, so they're going to call us admin, is going to be 6,500 times 12. So that's essentially a fixed cost. And they also have a variable cost of 0.50 per ticket. Alright, so again, you're transferring from what essentially was admin staff were paid 25 grand per annum, and you have 2 admin staff, and you also had the IT system, which was 60 grand per annum. So the total, the existing cost was 25,000 times 2 plus 60,000, and that was all fixed. So you're now changing from a fixed cost base to some element piece or variable element. So again, they're changing the type of cost structure to make it more flexible. So what is the new break-even based on this? Calculate the break-even level if the new ticketing proposal is gone. Well, now we have to do, what's the new fixed cost in total? Well, the existing fixed costs, remember you're looking at these in separate, so completely ignore part D, as you're told in the question, look at these proposals separately. The existing fixed costs here was 3.8 million. Alright? So existing fixed costs were 3.8, but you are making the adjustment then, so 3.8 million was the existing fixed costs. You're reducing that by 110,000 because the staff are no longer needed. Now there's the IT system, so you're saving on that, but you have additional fixed costs of the admin fee every month of 78. So that slightly brings down your fixed cost to about 3.768 million. Your new variable cost, well, your variable cost before, so again, you're just making adjustments off the existing, was 8.8, but you now have an additional variable cost because you're charged for every ticket sold of 0.50, so 50 cents. So your new variable cost is 930, and don't forget you need the new CPU is 18 euro per ticket minus the 930. So your variable or your contribution per unit slightly falls with this new arrangement, and now the break-even point is essentially your fixed costs over your CPU. So based on this, your break-even is 433,000 tickets. Okay, so it's important. That's what you're asked for, is to calculate the break-even level under the new ticketing proposal. So you see here the break-even level under this proposal, in comparison to what it was before, is 20,000 tickets higher. So slightly risky if you're going to comment on that. It's a higher proportion, but again, there is a possibility of, and you're told here, believe sales will increase due to the increased exposure and ease of booking. He's just not sure by how much. And the second part of that question is, well, actually, how much do sales actually have to increase to justify this proposal? So yes, there's an additional cost and the break even goes up. How much do you have to increase level of activity, i.e. sales, before the currently budgeted, the level of profits is currently budgeted is the same for the, apologies, move down. How much ticket sales will have to increase to justify this proposal? So no effect on overall profits. So this is the same as before. Your target profit is again your 800,000. So we want to make 800,000, but we now are looking at a new structure with a new contribution per unit and a new fixed cost. So based on that then, the units required or tickets required is your fixed costs plus your target profit over your contribution per unit. So that's essentially telling me that I need to sell 525,000 tickets to have the same level of profitability if I stay with the current ticketing operations. So if I go to the new ticket operations and let you ask how many tickets a sale has increased, the increase required is, take away from 500,000, 25,000. So it's essentially 5% increase. So again, that's a very practical consideration and practical question, that if you're going to go to a new ticket proposal, how much do I need to increase activity to justify it? You need to increase it by about 5%. And the final one then, just to make sure students are keeping their managerial hat on and not just looking at the financial implications, is the question is, discuss 3 non-financial factors of the new ticketing proposal that should be considered before a final decision. Now again, in an exam there might be 6 marks going for this. For example, 3 factors by 2. And it's not about just identifying them, you must discuss them. So any relevant one here will get you marks. So don't be worried about hitting the exact ones in the solution. So for example here, one thing I would be saying is, how confident are you based on your market research that you will get a 5% increase? Is there any justification or evidence for that? Because if you don't, it will ultimately be loss making, this new ticketing proposal. Second thing might be is it risky removing all your IT system and making your admin staff redundant? How reliable is this ConcertTickets.ie, and will they be around in a year's time? Right? And are they the only alternative? So that's the second point you could make. Another important point you could make, it's slightly financial, but again non-financial as well, is the HR considerations. We have no consideration of redundancy costs. Are the admin team doing other jobs, not just the ticketing system, that will have a knock-on impact? So as I said before, you're asked for 3 non-financial considerations. As long as they are well justified and discussed in detail, so again I'm talking about a line, 2 or 3 lines, just to understand your logic of including it, you will get the marks. You don't have to hit the exact ones in the solution. As long as they're logical and well reasoned, you will be rewarded. So that is ConcertCo. So a good exam standard question in terms of the calculations and the detail involved, and covering the cost, volume, profit analysis.